Okay, our keynote for tonight is Jeff Bennett. I had the pleasure of listening to Jeffrey Bennett at a previous conference in Louisville, and I was really impressed with what he had to say. It really brought home the idea that math nowadays is getting to be a little bit less of the plug and chug or just straight algebra. He's looking more at the quantitative literacy aspects of it, which are becoming more and more, not only in style, but I think more important for our graduates as they move on. He is the author of some college textbooks in mathematics, statistics, astronomy, and astrobiology. So he's pretty well hit most of the areas of mathematics. And actually, he did not start out his career wanting to be an author, is what he was telling me earlier. Basically, he graduated and was invited to participate at his university, I believe it's the University of Colorado, to start up the quantitative reasoning degree and program. And so he started on the committee just defining what this quantitative reasoning was. Once the committee had decided what quantitative reasoning was going to be, he was actually instrumental in creating the courses, creating the curriculum to go with it. And over the years, as he taught it, he got more and more material. As he said, as the material got thicker, then the publishers contacted him and said, hey, we're interested in publishing this. And so he got started on that. And that just opened up a whole world of publishing. Once they realized he was an astronomer, he was like, how many astronomers want to write books? So he was more than happy to oblige. But I won't go any farther. Let me introduce to you Jeffrey Bennett, and I hope you enjoy his presentation.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate you inviting me to speak with you out here tonight. And for those of you who did hear me at the Pioneers Conference, I apologize that a lot of it will be repeat, but hopefully that'll be okay. So with that intro there, I thought I'd just give you a little bit more background, because I know you're all fighting a good fight out here on this quantitative reasoning type of idea and getting our students to understand math better. So the idea behind the quantitative reasoning requirement that I got involved with a long time ago now was we had at the University of Colorado, at that time in the 80s, there was no general mathematical requirement for our liberal arts students. In other words, we had a lot of students coming in to a four-year top-tier state university who had taken 2 years of math in high school, probably 9th and 10th grade. That was the admission requirement at the time. And there was no requirement for them to take any more in college. So we were having college graduates that hadn't seen any kind of mathematics since 10th grade. And the university decided that was going to change. They upped the entrance requirements, so you had to have 4 years of high school mathematics. And then they decided there was also going to be some sort of general mathematics requirement. And the question was, what would that general mathematics requirement be? And without going into too much detail, if you have more questions on it, you can ask me later, but you can kind of imagine what the argument came down to, which was initially you had your choices were to either require algebra or calculus, because those were the courses that the mathematics department offered that could be in principle taken by anyone who wasn't going much further in math. And of course, you could make a very good argument for everyone taking calculus, but it's probably not very realistic if you're having a one-semester requirement for college to expect people to learn calculus. That left algebra. The problem was, now that the university was requiring 4 years of math to enter college, they'd already taken algebra in high school. So there was kind of this question of, we don't have anything to offer that will fulfill our new mathematics requirements, so what do we do with it instead? And the university decided they were going to do this thing that they call quantitative reasoning. I don't know for sure, but I believe when the university first defined this, it was 1984, and I think they were the first people to use the term. And then I got involved in 1987 when they were really getting moving on it and asked me to sit in on the quantitative reasoning development committee to define what quantitative reasoning would mean, and I taught a quantitative reasoning course starting in the fall of 1988, which I think was the first quantitative reasoning course course in the country, but I'm sure there may be others who were getting started at the same time or earlier. But that's how I got involved in all this. Now I'm going to talk to you tonight a little bit about this particular book, which is quantitative reasoning, but it's more for the general public. And the reason I got into this particular book was because in the process of teaching a quantitative reasoning course, of course, you realize that students are, by and large, coming into this type of course with a lot of bad attitudes towards mathematics. And the students who take this course are not the only Americans who have this problem. So I wanted to try to do something that I hoped maybe people who weren't going to spend the whole semester might at least get a little bit of a taste of. When I first submitted this book to publishers, the title of it was not Math for Life. My original title was, in parenthesis, don't be, and then in big letters, bad at math. I thought that might get people's attention, but the publishers decided that putting bad at math on the cover might not be a great idea, so we changed it to Math for Life, because it is, after all, math for life. But the reason I had that bad at math idea was because the problem we have with Math for Life is usually traced to this bad at math thing, which I'll tell you more about in a moment. But you can kind of see what Math for Life is right off the bat. You're probably familiar with it. But right here on the cover, what are our real choices for energy? How do politicians play games with redistricting? Is it safe to talk and drive on your cell phone? And national debt, and so on. And then the subtitle of the book is Crucial Ideas You Didn't Learn in School, because the interesting thing that you can see immediately just from the things on the cover here is that these are all clearly mathematical questions, right? You need mathematics to answer any of them. But you really can't find anywhere, certainly in the K-12 curriculum, where this is taught. We teach the basic equation skills, but we don't teach the mathematical thinking skills, what we now call quantitative reasoning. Just to give you a little sense of the kinds of topics that I cover here, and they're also the topics that we cover in the textbook, you know, big numbers, statistics, money, taxes, deficit and debt, energy, and so on. And I'll talk about a few of these as we go through today. Every chapter in the book starts with a multiple choice question. So I'm giving you the one from chapter 1, which will help explain where my original title came from. So you've just struck up a conversation with a dynamic, successful businesswoman. Which of the following are you most likely to hear her say during the course of your conversation? So choice A is, I really don't know how to read very well. B is, I can't write a grammatically correct sentence. C is, I'm awful at dealing with people. D is, I've never been able to think logically. And E is, I'm bad at math. And we all know the answer is E. And now we can start to think about why, and what does that mean to us as individuals and as a society. Now, A through D, when you see them written up on the screen like that, or when you think about it, they sound completely ridiculous. There's no possible way you could imagine an otherwise successful person saying any of those things, A through D. And yet E, I'm bad at math, happens all the time. Businesswomen, businessmen. CEOs, I've heard say, I'm bad at math. Actors, actresses, athletes, lawyers, doctors, you name it, you'll find people who will say, I'm bad at math. Interestingly, much of the time when you hear people say it, it's probably not even true. Right? You don't get to be a successful businesswoman if you're actually really bad at math. You had to get good grades. You had to do well all through high school and college. And the same for a lot of these other people. So this is really reflective, less perhaps of a reality than of an attitude that people consider to be acceptable. And a big part of what I think is a problem in our society today is that this attitude not only is too pervasive, but it's a social disease. It's like AIDS or hepatitis, right? It spreads from one person to another. When a child hears a respected adult say, I'm bad at math, as though that's okay, what message does it send to the child? That that's okay. Girls in particular tend to hear this a lot from women, and then they're told, you're a girl, you're not going to be good at math. I mean, it's insane, right, that we do this to our children, but we do, and as a result, we propagate the disease to the next generation. So my first message that I hope people who read the book, all of you will get across to your students when you're teaching them and so on, is even in the off chance that you are actually bad at math, don't say so. If you're a poor reader, you probably don't go around telling people, I don't really know how to read very well. So if you're poor at math, don't go around telling people as though it's okay. It's not okay. It should be embarrassing if you're bad at math. So you don't want to admit it. And in fact, most people really aren't if they aren't able to put the effort into it. Now this bad at math disease has consequences both on an individual and a social level. So I just want to give you a little taste of a few of those. We'll start with the individual level. This is a table that shows the top 20 majors by mid-career salary. And you probably can't read the screen too well from where you are, but if you go down the list, it starts out chemical engineering, computer engineering, electrical engineering, engineering, economics, physics, computer science, engineering, math, physician assistant engineering, finance, information systems. Almost all of these top salary majors require some fairly advanced mathematics. Therefore, when students say, I'm not going to do any more mathematics, they could just as easily be saying, I'm going to rule out most of the highest paying careers. Because that's what they're doing when they make that decision. Incidentally, you know I'm here because I'm a proponent of teaching quantitative reasoning at the college level. We could also do it at the high school level, but at the college level we do it for students who are not going to take any more algebra or calculus or anything else. At the high school level there's been a debate over the last year or so since an article appeared in the New York Times arguing that we shouldn't require algebra for all of our students anymore. I'll just say I disagree with that strongly. If you're under 18, then you're our responsibility. And it's our responsibility to make sure you don't make a decision that rules out half the good jobs available out there before you turn 18. Once you turn 18, if you make that decision, that's up to you. But before that, we need to require our students to get at least as far as algebra so that if they want to, they have the option to go to all these kinds of careers. Once they get to college, well, we might have to teach them other things. Some students will tell you when they see that first graph, that's okay, I don't care about money. I'm into happiness, lifestyle, all that kind of thing. So instead of looking strictly from a financial point of view, you can look at jobs from an overall job satisfaction point of view. So this particular survey here was done a couple of years ago, appeared on the website jobsrated.com. And what they did was they took into account surveys of several different factors, lifestyle, hours, how much you enjoyed your job. Salary was one of the 5 factors that they used, and made a list of the top jobs by job satisfaction. And I just love this one because look what came in at number 1. Mathematician. You are the most satisfied people in the United States. So that's either really good news or really bad news, depending on how you look at it, right? Actuaries and statistician came in at 2nd and 3rd. I don't know. I think it was an honestly done survey. I'm assuming it was, but it certainly looks like somebody had a little bias up there at the top. Right? But again, as you go down the list, not all, but many of these top satisfaction jobs are ones that involve fairly sophisticated mathematics. So for students, for individuals, if you accept being bad at math, you're basically accepting that you're limiting your own future possibilities for both financial reward and satisfaction. You're not ruling them out, you're just limiting the number of ways you can get to it. So for individuals, especially for high school students, seeing this hopefully makes some impact and makes them think, okay, maybe I ought to be paying attention to this stuff more closely. Now, for society, we've just gone through, or we're still going through, the repercussions of a major financial crisis that hit in about 2008, I guess, 7 and 8. And you can ask, what was the cause of this financial crisis? And my answer is the social disease of bad at math. Now, that's obviously not the immediate cause of the crisis. The immediate cause of the financial crisis was the collapse of the housing market and the mortgage crisis that resulted from it. But why did that happen? Well, here's a graph. This graph shows you median home price to median household income ratio. So the ratio is plotted here on this graph. So in other words, if you take, for example, a ratio of 3.0, that means if you have an income of $50,000 per year, 3.0 means your house costs 3.0 times that. So you own a $150,000 house. And what you can see is that going back to the, since this data was being collected in the late 60s, it's varied a bit over time, but the average of this ratio has stayed pretty close to 3 throughout many decades. So $50,000 income, $150,000 house. Well, what happens here? In the early 2000s, it spikes up in just a few years from under 3.5 to 4.7, which means all of a sudden somebody with that $50,000 income, instead of buying a $150,000 house, is buying an almost $250,000 house. Now you can ask yourself, how is that possible? How can a person who previously was buying a house 3 times their income how can people suddenly be buying houses 4.7 times their income? There's basically 3 possibilities. Possibility 1 is average incomes have gone up, which means you've got more free money around for spending. But statistics showed that during this period, average incomes were not rising like that. So that's not the right answer. Possibility number 2 is you are able to spend more in housing because you spend less on everything else. But statistics show that consumer spending actually rose on other things during this same period of time. So that's not it. The third possibility is you're spending more than you can afford. Therefore, this was inevitable, this collapse here. It could not possibly have been avoided. This is the housing bubble. Now, if you're in this period of time and you see that prices are going up like this, if you're good at math, you say, hey, this can't be. But if the whole country, at least as a whole, is bad at math, then you go, wow, this will keep going forever. And you end up in the mess we're in today. So this is a math recession that we've been in, right? And it was caused by too many people either being or being willing to believe that they are bad at math. So therefore, instead of looking at their own finances and saying, gosh, I can't really afford this loan, they listen to the loan officer who says, hey, you can afford this loan. And instead of the loan officer saying, you can't afford this loan, they listen to their bank president who says, hey, make a lot more loans. And the bank president listens to Moody's or whoever that says, oh, these are AAA rated, right? Then you can keep going down the line, and every step of the way, you see someone making a decision that with a little bit of thinking about the math could have been avoided. So with that, I will leave that topic behind and jump right on into the next one, which is big numbers. Your students, the average American, they know that 10 is more than 1. They know that 100 is more than 10. They know that 1,000 is more than 100 and 1,000,000 is more than 1,000. But, and this is not completely facetious, this is kind of real. For the average American, if you talk about million, billion, or trillion, all you've done is change the consonant at the beginning of the word. In the newspaper, if you had one of these articles, that's going out there about today, the deficit and debt talks today, where they're talking about how many trillions they want to cut, and you change it to millions, most people wouldn't notice the difference. And yet, it's an enormous difference. So these examples show you a little bit of that. Imagine that you're a pro athlete earning $1 million a year. How many years do you have to keep playing before you've earned $1 billion? And, for those of us who understand numbers, this is a very easy question. The answer is 1,000 years. But that blows away the average non-mathematically inclined student, the average American. Whoa, 1,000 years of $1 million a year just to get to $1 billion? Well, yeah, because it's 1,000 million, right? We read all the time about these boards of directors giving out $100 million to some, hedge fund manager or whatever else, CEO. Most CEOs don't get quite that much, but it has happened a few times. $100 million paychecks, basically. Well, fine. If that person's done a really good job, maybe they deserve the $100 million. But if you think about it mathematically, it doesn't tell you that they don't deserve it, but it tells you that maybe you should also be considering what else could you do with that $100 million. For example, let's say you're Goldman Sachs and you can give out a $100 million bonus to your top couple of executives here. Or you can think, gosh, for long-term investing, what if we invented this really incredible new thing that would make us billions in the future? How are we going to do that? Well, we could hire a bunch of really smart scientists and engineers. How much will that cost? Well, let's say we pay them $100,000 salary. Pretty good salary. And let's say they need another $100,000 per year worth of lab equipment, services, and everything else. So it's going to cost us $200,000 per year for each of these scientists or engineers that we hire. That means with $100 million, we can hire 500 of them. Which is going to return greater long-term shareholder value to the company? The 500 scientists and engineers you hire, or the $100 million paycheck to a couple of executives? It can be debated. There will be people who will answer the latter as the right answer. But my guess is that most people haven't thought through what the alternatives are. And if you want to be a little bit more depressing here, what's your share of the $15 trillion US debt? Well, that's easy. You just divide by the population and you'll see it's about $50,000 per person. For the typical family of 4, it's $200,000. Which means the average family of 4 has a greater debt share for the federal government than all their own personal debt, mortgage included. More than their student, including student loans, auto loans, everything else. Your biggest debt to the future is your share of the national debt. Now again, there are some people who argue that it's okay to have a big national debt, that having deficits as long as it doesn't get higher than a certain percentage of GDP is okay. That's fine, maybe it is. But you should at least be thinking about what the numbers mean before you draw your conclusions. I think maybe one of the lessons here is that all of these mathematical things, they don't make the politics go away, right? People are going to still have different opinions about what to do about things. But what they do is they allow you to have an intelligent discussion of the politics instead of an uninformed discussion. I'm going to move pretty quickly. I want to give you kind of a sampling of the different ideas that Math for Life would cover. And so I want to move over to statistics. And there's the famous statement that there's 3 kinds of lies. Lies, damned lies, and statistics. And it's funny, hopefully it's not really true, right? So the better statement in my mind is truthiness and statistics. Truthiness, those of you who watch Stephen Colbert know his word for truth that comes from the gut rather than from the brain. And you can kind of see, so truthiness is what you can take statistics and use it for truthiness pretty easily. And maybe this example here shows you the idea. So the question is, adjusted for inflation, income over the past 3 decades has either been stagnant, rising less than 10%, or risen significantly by more than 27%. Now you notice I did not phrase this as a multiple choice question here. I'm not going to ask you to pick which is the correct answer. The reason I'm not going to ask you to pick which is the correct answer is because they're both correct. Okay? Maybe now that I've told you that, you can figure out how. This is median income, right? Has barely moved over the last 3 decades. This is mean income. If you're a politician, depending on your particular political persuasion, you will pick one or the other of these to say, right? That's your truthiness. But if you understand it, there is some actual real truth in here that you can get at by understanding the difference between median and mean and how the skewing of the curve can affect things and so on and what that means. There's many, many other examples that we can go to of statistical thinking. One I just want to go over very briefly from the cover of the book was the one about cell phones and driving, because it's a really interesting one and a very practical one, not only for your students, but perhaps for you and friends and family and so on. So the question is it safe to be talking on a cell phone while you drive? How do you answer that question? The only way to answer that question is through statistics. That's why there's the truth part up here. Statistics is a powerful way to get at truth that we can't get at in any other way. You can look at accident statistics to try to learn about the effects of cell phones and driving. Perhaps even more important, you can do experiments in the lab with driving simulators, looking at the brain, looking at responses, and these are still statistical experiments, right? When a student drives in the lab, they don't crash every time when they're talking on their cell phone, or not crash every time. You have to look at the statistics of what actually happens. Same thing even when you're looking at brain imaging of what's going on during driving with a cell phone. Even when you're looking at those brain images, it's not going to always show exactly the same thing every time you look at the brain, right? You have to analyze the data statistically to figure out what's actually going on. What are the results? A lot of this work's been done at the University of Utah in their laboratory. The results are kind of astonishing. When you are talking on your cell phone while driving, you are as dangerous as a drunk driver. It doesn't matter if you're using a hands-free device. It's the distraction in your brain that's causing the danger, not the physical holding of the phone. Don't even get started on texting while driving, because now you're also taking your eyes off the road. At least when you're distracted, your eyes see the road, they're just not paying attention to it. But when you're texting, you're not even seeing the road. So you can see the statistics tells us some very valuable information. 40, 50 years ago in the United States, drunk driving wasn't really thought to be a big deal. People did it all the time. Now we know it's unacceptable. You don't find people thinking it's okay. People still sometimes do it, but it's hard to find someone who thinks that's okay. You know, my hope is a few years from now we'll say the same thing about cell phones and driving. This is a great danger. The Transportation Department says that about 1/4 of all accidents now are caused by distracted driving. By the way, one of the really interesting things that's come out of this is it's not talking that's the problem. If you're talking to a passenger, it does not create this same distraction that talking on a cell phone does. It's something about that person not being in your presence that activates areas of the brain and keeps those areas from focusing on the task at hand. And I'm not sure anyone completely understands all the mechanics behind it, but that's the reality. All right, now, who wants an extra $1 million? It's too late for you, sorry. But if you're talking to students, you can say, hey, do you want another extra $1 million? And you can offer them some choices. Your best strategy for getting an extra, the real answer is neither one of those. Who pays the lowest rate?
E.
Not as tricky as you might think. A pays the lowest rate, the $8 an hour minimum wage type person. In fact, they might not be paying anything at all. They might be getting money back from the government through the earned income tax credit and other things, depending on their personal circumstances, family, other things. Who pays the second lowest rate? That now it's E. At least now. Next year it will be B. Why? Well, why does E pay the second lowest rate? Because E is getting investments, income from capital gains, which are taxed at a lower rate than, quote, earned income. The maximum capital gains rate right now is 15%, but for 2013 it rises to 20%. And that's enough to switch the order of B and E. Let's go on to the last two. We're left with C and D. Who pays the higher rate, C or D? C pays the higher rate. It's really bizarre, right? How can the D executive who's earning twice as much as C be paying a lower rate of taxes? The answer is the self-employment tax, right? FICA takes 7.5% of your paycheck, but the employer matches that. If you're self-employed, you match it yourself. And so that's enough of a difference, even given the income difference, to push her rate higher than his. So the answer in 2012, AEBDC, in 2013, ABEDC, but the point is, no matter who you are, Republican, Democrat, flat tax advocate, progressive tax advocate, regressive tax advocate, no matter who you are, nobody says this is what the answer should be. And yet that's the law. Tells you something about the law, right? We have an insane tax policy in the United States. You can have different opinions about what would make more sense, but everybody should be able to agree, this one doesn't. And therefore come to the table to come up with a solution that, even if it's not what everybody wants, we ought to be able to come up with something better than this, right? We'll go to energy now. One of my favorite personal topics. A fusion power plant hooked up to your kitchen sink could generate enough energy for us. So first of all, let's be clear on what we're talking about here. Nuclear fusion is not the same as nuclear fission. All of our current nuclear power plants are nuclear fission power plants. They use uranium or plutonium as fuel, which is split into smaller atoms, releasing energy in the process. Nuclear fusion goes the other direction. It's what the sun does. You take hydrogen atoms and you fuse them to make helium. Nuclear fusion is something that we have done as human beings in what we call thermonuclear bombs. What we have not done is figured out how to release that same energy at a more gradual rate that doesn't destroy the entire city around you. If we could, it would be very nice, because then, instead of having to go find the uranium or plutonium and dealing with these dangerous radioactive materials, for fuel, all we would need is hydrogen. And hydrogen is part of water, H2O, which means you can turn on your kitchen sink, let the water flow out, hook up your nuclear fusion reactor to it. If you remember the Back to the Future movies, it was Mr. Fusion, right? Draw the hydrogen out of the water as it comes out of your faucet, fuse it into helium, and make energy from it. So the question is, if we could do that, how much energy would you be able to make? Enough for your house, your block, 500 homes, Denver, or the entire United States? And when I've done this with high school students, most of the time, they will choose something in A through D, because E sounds so completely ridiculous. It's thrown in there as a joke, right? E is the correct answer. It's a very easy calculation to do. All you need to know is how much you get from each how much energy is generated by each individual fusion of 4 hydrogen into 1 helium nucleus. You can look that up on the web real easily. Figure out how much hydrogen there is flowing through your faucet. measure the rate that the water is coming out, gallons per minute, figure out how much hydrogen's in each gallon, so then you have the amount of hydrogen you're getting per minute, multiplied by the energy per reaction, and you got your total. And it comes out that what you get from your fusion reactor on your kitchen sink could power the entire United States. Let me be clear on what I mean by power the entire United States. I mean it's more than our total energy usage in this country, including everything. All the oil, all the coal, all the nuclear, all the solar, all the hydroelectric, all the wind. Your kitchen sink with a fusion reactor would mean we wouldn't need any of those other things anymore, as long as you're willing to let us borrow your kitchen sink. Here's a little data on our actual energy use. Our current U.S. energy usage is an oil equivalent of 74 million gallons per hour. What do I mean by oil equivalent? Well, we actually get only about 40% of our energy from oil. The rest comes from coal, natural gas, and other sources. But if it were all oil, this is how much oil it would be. What if all that oil were coming from overseas? Then we would be needing 44,000 supertankers to dock in our ports every single year to bring this much oil to us. That's what we are using today. The oil has costs. We know, we pay for it. But it also has costs that we don't pay for. For example, the National Institutes of Health say that the health cost of pollution from this oil, and oil equivalent here, comes to $120 billion per year, minimum, conservatively. Why conservatively? Because what they've done is they've based that on the cost of actual hospitalizations, asthma attacks that put somebody in the hospital and so on. This is not just somebody who doesn't feel good and doesn't go to work. That would make that number a lot higher. This is the undisputed, easily documented cost. Same thing for the defense cost, protecting our oil supply. The Department of Defense says they spend $100 billion a year doing that. This does not include any of the costs of the Iraq War and any of these other things that have gone on in recent years. This is just assuming everything else was fine, what we spend just to have the military presence that keeps our oil supplies safe. And when you add up those numbers and divide them by your oil equivalent, you find it comes to about $1.50 per gallon. So think about that. Right off the bat, the cost, the undisputed cost just for the security and pollution is $1.50 a gallon. Who pays for that? Well, we all do, right? Through our taxes, health insurance, and so on. But that cost is a real cost that we're all absorbing as a society. And that's only the obvious, undisputed costs. Then there's the environmental costs, which are much more difficult to quantify, but they presumably make this number be much higher than that. And I want to talk about one in particular because the highest environmental cost, most likely, is the one that we're least able to actually make a quantitative statement about. And that's the cost of global warming. Now, global warming is an interesting one because people have all these questions about whether it's real or a hoax or whatever. But it's actually a very simple mathematically analyzed problem. Because you can say, well, how do you deal with any research problem, scientific, mathematical? You look at what the claims are behind it and you try to analyze them through your research to see whether they stand up to scrutiny. So global warming is a very simple idea. It's based on the idea that carbon dioxide warms planets and that we're adding carbon dioxide to the atmosphere, in which case you would expect things to warm up. Well, how do you evaluate that? Well, the first claim, carbon dioxide traps heat and makes planets warmer, you can evaluate that a couple of ways, two main ways. The first way is you can measure in the laboratory. This is mathematics. It's science, but it's also mathematics. When you make measurements to see what is the effect of carbon dioxide in a tube on light, to see what it does. And what you find is it traps heat. You can get more detail than that, but it traps heat. That was first discovered more than 150 years ago. It's not a new idea. The second idea is, the second way you can test it is by saying, okay, well maybe that what happens in the tube is not the same as what happens to a whole planet, right? That's possible. So let's see, does it happen to a whole planet? The way you can test that is to see if your predicted planetary temperature matches the actual planetary temperature. And this is a picture out of one of my children's books here, and even though I don't go into the details in the book itself, the equation on the board is actually the real equation for calculating the temperature of a planet in the absence of carbon dioxide or any greenhouse warming. It's a very simple equation based on your distance from the sun and how much light the planet reflects. Real easy. This is not advanced mathematics. And what you find is that the answer you get from this equation gives you exactly the right planetary temperature for planets that don't have any greenhouse gases, or worlds like the moon or Mercury. But any place that has a greenhouse gases in its atmosphere, carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, you don't get the right answer. You get too low of an answer. How do you get the right answer? You measure from the laboratory what the effect of the carbon dioxide is, add that into your calculation based on the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and guess what? Then the answers match. We can predict correctly the temperature of every planet based on its carbon dioxide concentration along with its distance from the sun and reflectivity. One of the really interesting things about this is for Earth, it turns out that without carbon dioxide in our atmosphere, the temperature would be negative 16 degrees Celsius, global average temperature. In other words, we would live on a frozen planet without that very small amount of carbon dioxide that's in our atmosphere. So the greenhouse effect is what makes life on Earth possible. Venus also has a greenhouse effect. It's got more carbon dioxide than Earth has, and it's 800 degrees Fahrenheit on the surface. Why? It's just a simple example. The greenhouse effect is a very good thing. We'd be frozen without it, but Venus tells us that it's possible to have too much of a good thing. The second claim is that human activity is increasing carbon dioxide concentration. How do you test that claim? Again, statistics. You make the measurements to see what's actually happening. And there they are, very simple. This is the ice core record of carbon dioxide over the past almost million years. And you see it varies naturally quite a bit, but it has not been over about 280 parts per million until the last couple of centuries, when it has been rocketing up. And today it's already up at beyond 390 parts per million and rising rapidly. And in case you're wondering, how do we know it's our carbon dioxide and not from volcanoes and so on, you can look at the isotopic makeup of the carbon dioxide. It's different when it comes from fossil fuels than when it comes from volcanoes, and it is our carbon dioxide. So we are shooting this up. So what do you conclude? You say, well, our summary is fact 1, carbon dioxide warms planets. Fact 2 is carbon dioxide concentration is going up. It's more than it's been in the past million years and rising rapidly. In fact, we're on track to be double the pre-industrial level by the time today's college students are our age. We're close in that range, depending on your particular age. So it's going like crazy, and the logical conclusion is that means Earth's going to warm. This is not rocket science, as they might say, right? This is easy, simple mathematical research. Now, we don't know how much it's going to warm exactly. We don't know exactly how bad it will be. That's what all the modeling is done for and so on. But the basic math behind it is pretty simple. And that brings us right back to our fusion problem. Because we know if we hooked up the fusion reactor to your kitchen sink, we wouldn't have a global warming problem anymore, because there's no carbon dioxide from our fusion reactor. We also wouldn't have any of those other health costs or oil security costs, right? In fact, we wouldn't even have to build wind farms and have people arguing about whether they look pretty or whether they're hurting the birds. All we need is your kitchen sink. So you could say, well, why don't we know how to do it? Well, who knows why we don't know how to do it. We haven't figured it out. Are we trying? Yes, we're trying. We're spending $400 million a year on it, which is 0.00001% of the federal budget. Now, it could be that if we spent a lot more, we still wouldn't figure it out. But you can kind of start to think, maybe it's worth a little more effort for something that would solve all our problems that way. It's not the only way we might solve all these problems. This painting here from one of my children's books shows the astronaut working on solar panels in space. There are companies that are looking into this right now. Launch a bunch of solar panels into Earth orbit. Why? Because it's never cloudy and it's never dark. They generate energy all the time. Put up a lot of big solar panels up there, collect the energy, beam it down by microwaves to ground stations at the equator, and then build a grid to channel it out to the world. Solve the world's energy problems that way again. No global warming, no health costs, no, we could do this. Unlike fusion, we can do this right now. We've got the technology. But we aren't going through the numbers and looking at the cost honestly. We're looking at the cost of the oil, and we're forgetting about all the cost of its consequences. And when you factor those in, you might come to different conclusions than you do about how to spend money when you look only at the production costs. And for my last example, some of you have heard this one before, like some of the others, but it's one of my favorites. It comes from Professor Al Bartlett at the University of Colorado. It's the parable of the bacteria in the bottle. I've dressed it up a little bit from the way he's done it originally. And the situation is very simple. You place a single bacterium in a nutrient-filled bottle at 11 o'clock. It eats the nutrients, it grows, and it divides into two, and so on. And we're setting this particular case up, just to make the math easy, with a doubling time of 1 minute. So they divide every minute. So you have 2 bacteria at 11:01, 4 at 11:02, 8 at 11:03, and so on. Now you know it's very easy to calculate the number of bacteria in the bottle, right? It's just 2 to the power of the number of minutes. But that's not what we're going to do, at least not initially. Instead, we're going to set up this story with the idea that at 12 o'clock, the bottle is full, all the nutrients are gone, and therefore the bacteria all die. So in other words, 12 o'clock is a really bad time for bacteria in this bottle. So question 1 is, you know they all die at 12 o'clock because the bottle's full. When was the bottle half full? Now, this is not fair, you're mathematicians, right? But you all know that the average American or the average student coming into a quantitative reasoning class, what are they going to say? They're going to try to say 11:30, right? But the answer is 11:59 because we're dealing with doublings, right? So we go to question 2. You are a mathematically sophisticated bacterium, and at 11:56 you recognize the impending disaster. You immediately jump on your soapbox and warn that unless your fellow bacteria slow their growth dramatically, the end is just 4 minutes away. And the question is, will anyone believe you? Now notice, the question is not, are you correct? You are correct. Okay? The question is, will they believe you? We're talking about average American bacteria. So, let's just take it backwards. At 11:59, it's half full. At 11:58, it's a quarter full. At 11:57, it's an eighth full. At 11:56, it's 1/16 full. So it's 11:56. Your civilization's been around for 56 minutes already. And now here you come getting on your soapbox saying, we're all going to die in 4 minutes because we're going to have used up everything. And you look around and you see you've only used 1/16 of the bottle in the whole first 56 minutes, which means there's still 15 times as much stuff unused as you've used. So as an average American bacterium, you say, whatever. Question 3, just before disaster strikes. Right, we're good at dealing with crisis management, right? Just before disaster strikes, the average American bacterium goes, oh my God. So they start a bacterial space program. And the bacterial space program discovers 3 more bottles full of nutrients, but nobody living in them out there in the lab. So the question is, if you suddenly start a mass population redistribution program so that you get all the bacteria in your bottle distributed equally among the 4 bottles that are in the lab, how much more time have you bought for your civilization? And you know, the interesting thing about this one, when you do it with students, particularly students who would, until you've taught them, otherwise might have said they're bad at math, even after you've done the other questions, they still want to say 3 more hours for the 3 more bottles. But of course the answer is 1 bottle at 12 o'clock, 2 bottles at 12:01, and 4 bottles at 12:02. You get 2 more minutes. And question 4, is there any hope that future discoveries will allow the colony to continue its exponential growth indefinitely? Now you can do some calculations if you want to see what's going to happen. Well, we know it's 2 to the power of minutes, so after an hour we have 2 to the 60th bacteria. Typical bacterium is a cubic micrometer in size. It's an easy number to use. So you figure out what the volume is. It's a bottle about this big. That's reasonable. Now at the end of the second hour, you have 2 to the 120th bacteria. Calculate the volume of that, divide it by the surface area of Earth, and you'll find that the entire Earth is covered 2 meters deep in bacteria after just 2 hours. And if you keep running the numbers, you will find that in around 5.5 hours, the calculated volume of your bacteria will exceed the volume of the observable universe. That can't happen. Not only because there's nothing to eat in space, but also because you can't even travel fast enough to spread things out that far, right? You can't go faster than the speed of light, so you can't go off 14 billion light years away in a few hours. So the answer to this question is no. There is no hope that future discoveries will allow them to continue their exponential growth indefinitely. Exponential growth is always a temporary phenomenon. It's mathematically impossible for it to go on forever. The housing bubble was this exact same thing, right? We were going up that exponential model of the housing growth. It couldn't sustain itself forever. Not possible. That's why it collapsed. Human population has been growing exponentially for the past several centuries. It will not continue to grow exponentially for the next several. Why not? Because we wouldn't fit. I mean, if you calculate out our current population growth rate in about something, I forget the exact number, somewhere around 800 years from now, we'd be elbow to elbow on the entire planet. It's just not going to happen. Now, that's not to say any particular policy. People argue about whether we should have more population growth, less population growth, and so on. But the point is, whatever we do now, it's not going to continue indefinitely. And the only question is, when does it stop? And how does it stop? And you can, if you're aware of this, you can make choices about how it stops. If you're not aware of this, you can let nature decide to make the choices for you, which you probably won't mind. And that brings us to this famous quotation from H.G. Wells going back almost 100 years already here, which I love this quotation, and I think for teachers it's especially resonant, which is that human history becomes more and more a race between education and catastrophe. And you can see this quite clearly. We are in that race right now. The question is, do we get educated as a society fast enough to make the smart decisions that are necessary for us to solve our problems and keep moving into the future? And I chose the pictures here because, you know, here's the real bad decision if you do this to your whole planet. Here's what I think is a real good decision. You get to go moving out into the universe and set the stage for, you know, becoming Star Trek. And here's the one that we probably should be most concerned about at the moment. And so those are the Math for Life book and my statistics and math textbooks, and there's some of my other stuff. And I will be happy to take as many questions as you want to ask me. Thank you very much.
Did you all have any questions for Jeffrey? I think he's done.
They haven't served food yet, so you got time to ask.
Okay, I want to make a couple announcements. The book that he's been talking about, Math for Life, we've got about 15 copies that Jeff is selling today. If you buy it today, he will be more than happy to sign it for you. They're $15 a copy. You can take care of business right up here in front on the table. Also, I would like to thank Otis Taylor and Pearson for sponsoring Jeffrey to get him here from Colorado. They spent a lot of money on it, and we sure appreciate him coming to visit. And as a token of our appreciation for you coming, we have a little gift bag.
Thank you very much. Wow, it's heavy. Ooh. Got moonshine in it, probably.
Maybe it's got the kitchen sink.
Okay, we got it's about like
Is it 4 miles?
so let's go ahead and grab a few more door prizes and see what we get. I've got some stacked up over on the table over here. Let's start out with another one of the flying monkeys. Those seem to be a big hit for most folks. Jenny? Scott's got it. Okay, the winner of the next flying monkey is Robin Davis. Let's see, we're going to give both a 4-port USB as well as one of the Post-it pads donated by KYMATYC to Patricia Faust. Okay, we're also going to get a luggage handle wrap, make it bright yellow so your luggage stands out when it comes through the airport, as well as another package of Post-its to Tate Bennett. And let's see what else he's got in his hand. How about another luggage tag and the Algebra 1 flipper? The flipper contains different ways to help work on certain types of problems. And the winner of that is John Fain. No, it's not here, so we'll find someone else for that. Virginia Metcalf. Okay, now we got 2 different books. We'll do them one at a time. The first one, My Best Mathematical and Logic Puzzles. Jim Rubin. And Entertaining Mathematical Puzzles goes to Brad Dyer. Okay, a couple of other announcements that we have. Remember, we have Aftermath coming up. Starts at 8 o'clock. That'll be downstairs. Folks here at the park have requested that we do not carry alcoholic beverages between the downstairs and this room, or upstairs. We need to keep it all downstairs. That's part of the regulations here at the park. So if you are going to take advantage of some of the beer, the wine, or even some of the moonshine that we're going to have down there, make sure you keep it down there. All right? That's a request that they made of me. Also for dinner, if you have a yellow ticket, that is your ticket to get dinner. There is no sign-in sheet or anything else. If you do not have a yellow ticket and you wish to do dinner, I'm not sure how that works, but Lynn can let you know how that works. So if you do not have a yellow ticket for dinner, see Lynn, she'll take care of you and make sure that you don't go hungry. See, looks like dinner's getting close, about 5 minutes. It is ready. Oh, yeah, Pat has something to say about the Ignite session. I forgot to mention that.
Okay, during the Aftermath this year, we're going to have the Ignite session. I sent out an email. I thank everybody in attendance. Scott and I saw this at KYMATYC last year. It was a fun session. It's in your program. It's scheduled to be in the room, the smaller room across the way. Just a quick show of hands. How many people are planning to come and watch that? Okay, so. Scott, am I doing here or over there? Didn't seem like this. Okay, so we will keep it over there. We'll probably start about 8:30, so that gives you time to go down there, enjoy some of the Aftermath, and then we'll make some announcements about that we're about to start. But we'll do it at 8:30 in the Stonehaven room. Okay, hope you join us. It should be a lot of fun.
One more announcement. There was a purse found in the